On today's episode of Notable New England, I'm welcoming back my very first podcast guest, Esther Friedman. Esther is a Massachusetts licensed mental health counselor, expressive art therapist, musician, and author of the book, The Gentle Soul's Revolution. And we're talking about why empathy matters more than ever, especially at a time when some people are trying to frame empathy as a weakness. It is an eye-opening conversation about how empathy strengthens community, deepens connection, and is actually a powerful asset. Stay tuned. Hello, lovely listeners, and thank you for tuning into Notable New England. If you're new here, my name is Gretchen B., and I am a lifelong proud New Englander. I'm so glad to have you join me today. I have to say I was pretty excited for the big snowstorm that we had this past week, and this one did not disappoint. I am one of those crazy New Englanders who actually loves snow, and I am thankful I did not experience any power outages or anything like that. It was so beautiful to watch it snowing and then to actually get outside in it. I will say, though, that the really low temperatures are not so much fun. Let's hope, though, that we get a little bit of a warm-up soon. On today's episode, I've brought back my very first guest of the podcast, Esther Friedman, who is a licensed mental health counselor in Massachusetts. She's also an expressive art therapist, musician, and she authored the book, The Gentle Soul's Revolution. A topic that Esther has been digging into a lot lately is the power of empathy, and her book, The Gentle Soul's Revolution, focuses on helping gentle souls or empaths recognize their empathy as a superpower. The conversation is really interesting because now more than ever, we need more empathy, especially in our communities. And Esther talks about how this actually makes us stronger. Now, before we get to that conversation, let's dig into some Wicked Light Bites, which are community-oriented stories and events from each New England state. In some sad news, Maine's Virginia Ginny Oliver, known as Maine's Lobster Lady, passed away at the age of 105. Ginny was born in Rockland, Maine, and started trapping lobsters at the age of 8, alongside her father and brother. She loved it so much, she continued on right up until close to her passing. The family obituary for her stated, quote, "Her life has been celebrated in books, articles, and across social media platforms worldwide. Yet despite her renown, she remained quiet and humble, greeting everyone with a quick, radiant smile and eyes that literally twinkled," end quote. Maine Governor Janet Mills said Ginny inspired, quote, "the next century of hardworking Maine fishermen," end quote. The Maine Lobster Festival stated, quote, "Virginia was more than a local icon. She was a living piece of Maine's maritime history," end quote. Ginny Oliver worked in the lobstering industry when it was a heavily male-dominated field. As she told the Associated Press in 2021, quote, "I like doing it. I like being along the water, and so I'm hoping to keep on doing it just as long as I can," end quote. And she certainly did. Information for this item comes from Kimberly Cruzy of the Associated Press. A lizard in a blizzard? A Providence, Rhode Island man caught quite a surprise as he was watching the snowfall during the recent snowstorm this past week. He spotted an exotic lizard trying to crawl out of the snow. He went out and got the lizard, wrapped it in a t-shirt, and called Warwick's E.T. Reptiles for help. E.T. Reptiles called animal control to see if anyone was missing an exotic lizard, and they had not received any calls. Veterinarians checked out the exotic lizard, which is a tegu, and found her to be underweight, suffering from frostbite on its tongue and muscle weakness from being exposed to the cold. The tegu was dubbed Frankie after the man who found her and unfortunately had to have part of her tongue amputated. Thankfully, though, Frankie is okay and resting comfortably now, and veterinarians are hoping for a good outcome. Tegus are legal to have in the state of Rhode Island, but as E.T. Reptiles reminds people, they cannot survive outdoors in the winter. Taylor Feria of E.T. Reptiles says, quote, "Don't put them outside. If it was a mistake and Frankie did escape, please contact us. We'll work with you to ensure it doesn't happen again," end quote. There is still no information on where Frankie came from, but if you happen to have information, please contact the New England Wildlife Center at 781-682-4878. Information for this item comes from Melanie De Silva and Barbara Ron at WPRI 12. The 20th Annual Winter Festival at Burr Pond State Park, 384 Burr Mountain Road in Torrington, Connecticut, will be happening Saturday, February 7th from 10 a.m. to 3 p.m. It is known as the largest winter event in Connecticut and features ice fishing, story times, search and rescue dog demonstrations, hiking, ice sculptures, bonfires and toasting marshmallows, furs and pelts displays, and live animals. The festival is put on by Deep's No Child Left Inside program in partnership with Fish with Care. Information for this item comes from the CT Parks website. As of this spring, Cape Cod potato chips will no longer be made on the Cape. The Hyannis factory of the potato chip company will be closing. The Campbell's company, which owns Cape Cod potato chips, says that the chips will be made in other factories in Wisconsin, North Carolina, and Pennsylvania. Since 1985, Cape Cod potato chips have been made at the Hyannis factory, and the factory hosted tours for the public. Today, the Hyannis factory only produces 4% of the chips, so the Campbell's company says it is no longer viable to keep it open. 49 workers are expected to lose their jobs with the closure, and Campbell's company says that they will get separation benefits and job replacement assistance. Campbell's Snacks president Elizabeth Duggan said, quote, "This difficult decision reflects a careful assessment of our business needs to strengthen our operations and position our snacks business for long-term growth. We maintain a community presence by honoring the brand's heritage and continue local investment to support the next generation of food innovators on Cape Cod." End quote. Information for this item comes from Neil Riley at CBS News. Vermont singer-songwriter Noah Kahan is coming out with a new album called The Great Divide on April 24th. In an Instagram post announcing the album, Kahan says, quote, "From a long silence forms a divide, a great expanse demanding attention. I stare across it. I see old friends, my father, my mother, my siblings, my younger self, the great state of Vermont. I want to scream these feelings, to gesticulate wildly at the figures on the other side, but my voice has grown hoarse and muted after years of climbing a ladder toward the wild, spiraling dreams that have materialized in front of me. Instead, I wrote them down next to a piano in Nashville, next to a pond in Guilford, Vermont, in a legendary studio in upstate New York, on a farm with a fire tower in only Tennessee. The songs are the words I would say if I could. They are the fears I dance with in the moments before I drift off to sleep. The music here is my best attempt to delve deeper into the people, places, and feelings that have made me who I am. I am grateful for all of it, for all of you, for listening to them, if you choose to do so. End quote. You can listen to the new single of the same name, The Great Divide, now wherever you stream music, and you can pre-order the album at Khan's website, which is noahkhan.com. Information for this item comes from the news team at WCAX3 as well as Noah Khan's Instagram feed. The Arts Council of Tamworth, New Hampshire will be hosting a Mardi Gras dance social on Saturday, February 21st from 7 p.m. to 10 p.m. at the Tamworth Townhouse located at 27 Cleveland Hill Road in Tamworth, New Hampshire. You can learn some Mardi Gras-inspired dances from dance instructor Whitney Prey and enjoy some great food and beverages. To get tickets, you can visit artstamworth.org. Information for this item comes from the Visit New Hampshire website and the Tamworth Arts Council's website. Up after the break, I'll be speaking with Esther Friedman, Massachusetts licensed mental health counselor, expressive art therapist, musician, and author of the book The Gentle Soul's Revolution, about how empathy is a superpower and how it comes into play when advocating for your community. Stay tuned. You're listening to Notable New England. For everything Notable New England, our website is the place to be. Head to notablene.podbean.com to catch up on past episodes, stay connected, and dig a little deeper into the stories we share here. While you're there, you will find easy ways to support the show, whether it's becoming a sustaining member on Patreon with membership starting at just $2 a month and some nice perks, or making a one-time gift through buymeacoffee.com. Every bit of support helps me keep bringing you the voices, history, and everyday moments that make New England so special. You'll also find links to our social media and the email address if you have any questions, ideas, or a story that you think belongs on the show. Again, that's notablene.podbean.com. notablene.podbean.com. Your one-stop shop for all things Notable New England. Hello, lovely listeners. If you are enjoying Notable New England, I'd love your help spreading the word. One of the easiest and most meaningful ways to support the show is simply to tell a friend. Share a favorite episode with somebody who loves good New England stories. And if you have a moment, consider rating the show 5 stars and leaving a quick review on your favorite podcast app. Those ratings and reviews really do matter. They help new listeners discover the show and let the podcast platforms know that this work is worth sharing. Whether it's a personal recommendation or a quick tap on the stars, your support helps Notable New England continue to grow. Thank you so much for listening and for helping these stories travel far and wide. I'm happy to have Esther Friedman, Massachusetts licensed mental health counselor, expressive art therapist, musician, and author of The Gentle Soul's Revolution, back on the podcast today. Esther, as you may recall, was the very first guest on the podcast. I wanted to talk with her again about the importance of empathy, and despite what some people say, it's not a weakness. In fact, it is a superpower. Esther is going to share more about this subject and why, now more than ever, empathy is essential for community building and being there for our neighbors. Welcome to the podcast, Esther. It's great to have you here.
Thank you, Gretchen. Thanks for having me back. I'm thrilled to be here.
I was listening to your song Seeds of Peace with your group, The Secret Sauce, and the opening line really stayed with me. And that opening line is, with the world going crazy all around us, it's easy to feel so alone. That feels especially true right now. So many of us are watching the news, talking with friends and loved ones, and being shaken by the level of cruelty that we're seeing. For people who are empaths, it can hit especially hard. To start us off, how would you define what it means to be an empath?
So I want to give credit where it's due. Janet Feld, there's three of us obviously in the trio: Janet Feld, Jackie Damsky, and myself. And Janet is the brilliant author of that particular song. You know, it's so funny, Gretchen. No one has ever asked me that directly, but um, I have noticed a preponderance of content on YouTube about the quote unquote super empath, which is interesting in and of itself. I'm like, I'm not sure what a super empath is, but the empath, I would say, which the person I would call a gentle soul, is someone who is very attuned to other people's emotions, to the relational dynamics in the room, focused on comforting, helping, understanding, listening, and absorbs a lot of the world's toxicity, really.
And when you hear the word empathy, what does it mean to you in this moment that we're living in?
Well, most of my clients are cut from this cloth. Gentle Souls Revolution, you know, therapy, healing arts is what I call my practice. I often find myself repeating several times a day, the world needs you. Like, there's so much meanness, and I'm not sure if I can swear on your, so I'll say the a-holes have the stage right now. You know, they're front and center. I do really believe there are more decent people than a-holes in the world, but it's very hard to not be cowed into silence. And also, it brings out, if you're like me and you've hit your wall, it brings out a side of you that you don't. I think, you know, there's this other side of empathy is like once you've crossed a certain boundary, it's like you protect yourself by going cold, you know? And that is necessary, actually, because you want to reserve the empathy that you have for those who actually deserve it, because it pays off in spades. I think the empathy, I have been saying this since I started my practice, which is like 2017 or so. Empathy is like a precious ruby. It's valuable, and you don't want people to squander it, you know? But when you offer it, the repercussions, the ripple effects, you don't know what the ripple effects are going to be. But if you're really offering it to someone who's appreciating it, respecting you, there are some repercussions you're never going to know, but they're really, really important.
It's interesting that you say sometimes empaths will, in essence, hit a wall and almost develop a shell in a way as a means of self protection. Can you speak more about that?
I think is actually that's a survival mechanism, and it's important. Like, listen to that and heed it. You know, if somebody in your life repeatedly violates boundaries, if you have the evidence that they're not going to respect you and that they're taking advantage of your empathy, and the evidence is that you're hitting a wall, you're getting to the point where you're like, you know what, I don't care. You can let that go. But you can let that person go. They're a waste of your time. I'm 60 now, so I'm like, life is short. It's short. You know, you don't want to squander your precious gift on someone who is, treating you like a toxic waste dump. Where you can mitigate that risk, where you can say, I don't need to have this person in my life, or maybe I don't need to be as close to this person. Do it.
I feel like, in a way, empathy is under attack right now. For instance, Elon Musk, had a quote that the fundamental weakness of Western civilization is empathy. Why do you think that empathy makes people with those same thoughts so uncomfortable?
Gretchen, I don't know. It's so interesting to me. I've always been fascinated, both fascinated and horrified by victim blaming. And it's like age old. It's like so easy to pin blame on somebody who's already vulnerable. And now it's become like a political thing that, there's these echoes through like Christian nationalism that empathy is a sin. I mean, like I'm just gonna say it, it's bullshit, but I guess it resonates with certain people. You gotta consider the source, like these right wing and I say Christian with quotes because they're not Christian. They've hijacked a religion and hung a cross around their neck. And then they think they can gaslight you into believing that empathy is a sin or whatever other BS they're peddling. It's just a really convenient way for somebody who wants to do what they want to do whenever they want it and not be held accountable to be like, well, it's on you because you felt something. It's on you because you're pointing out my bad behavior. That's really convenient.
This brings up my next question because many people feel like they're being told that their reactions to what is going on are wrong or exaggerated, or even when they're seeing things clearly and have clear evidence to back it up, they're being told that, no, you didn't see what you saw. I understand that this is called gaslighting, and I'm just wondering if you could explain what gaslighting is and how people can recognize when it's happening.
If you are feeling confused in an interaction, and if you're thinking to yourself, am I crazy? You're probably being gaslit. So the recognition comes from within. And you have to like tag, like, oh, I'm feeling confused and I'm asking myself if I'm crazy because this thing, let's just fill in the blank, is so obviously wrong to me. And this other person or entity or group is telling me that, no, actually, it's you. There's the definition of gaslighting, right? Like something is happening, it's fucked up, and any decent person would see it as wrong, but the feedback you're getting is, oh no, you're just too sensitive. And it's so disorienting. You feel so off balance by that kind of feedback because we're so influenced by other humans. You know, we are a group. We are a species that needs to be in groups and accepted and engaged. And watch out for those who make you feel like you're off balance, who makes you feel crazy, who make you feel confused. Confusion is a big one. If you're like, I'm always confused around this person, that's a red flag.
Obviously, with the events in Minnesota, we have all seen played out on TV and have clear evidence of via various video recordings. If I'm now following the gaslighting playbook, we are being gaslit by those in power who are trying to say, no, you didn't see what you saw, and then trying to convince you to blame the victims or that you're crazy because you are calling attention to it.
It's gaslighting. Our executive branch is gaslighting us. Christy Nome is a gaslighter. I mean, Renee Good was sitting in her car filming someone. She was not threatening anybody, you know? The person who shot her screamed effing bitch before he shot her. Like, again, this is a really good example of like, that is obviously incredibly wrong. I don't even have the language. And you've got this federal official telling you that it's upside down and ass backwards.
Being gaslit is incredibly angering. And, we're talking obviously about a very extreme example, but gaslighting does appear a lot of the time in everyday life, often from people that we personally know and trust. And that can make it especially hard to recognize and respond to. People, who gaslight often try to overwhelm you or distort reality or shift the conversation so much that you're feeling left confused or you're doubting yourself and unsure how you should push back. Now, what would you say to someone who is being gaslit by someone close to them about how to deal with that situation?
Yeah, they're gonna use against you your thoughtfulness, your ability to try to see both sides. I think actually the best response is often no response, but there are certain ways that you can cut it off. One of my favorites is I don't agree with you, and then you just don't engage. Another one that I really love is whatever you need to tell yourself. You disengage though. That's the headline. It's like, okay, I recognize that this person is messing with me. And, in the case of empaths, which is what we're talking about, taking advantage of my nature. This is the way you're wired. It's not going to change if you're empathic, you know? And you really, really right now need to protect it. So if you start to recognize that somebody's taking advantage of it, you find a way to disengage and put as much distance between you and them as possible. And I recognize that in some cases, you know, let's say you're married to someone and you're like, wow, this person's been gaslighting me. That's a lot harder. It's not impossible to find strategies, but you have to see that you need strategies around this person. This isn't a normal interaction. Like in a normal interaction, you would give somebody the benefit of the doubt, in a dialogue. But if you recognize that in the dialogue, you're always being dismissed, you're always being invalidated, you're always being kind of pathologized because you're so sensitive, you're being gaslit. And this is not somebody that you want to have close to. You want to strategize.
Now, to bring this back to what is happening in the country right now, I've heard a lot of people, especially empaths, say that they feel completely exhausted. They care deeply and want to help, but they can't do everything at once. And it leaves them feeling very overwhelmed and like they're spinning their wheels, and they start to wonder, whether what they're doing actually makes a difference. What advice would you give to people who are feeling this way?
One of the things I saw recently said, choose your cause. You don't have to do everything. You can't do everything. You know, choose your cause. For me, there's an ice facility in Burlington. It's really close to me. I go there and protest. Okay. It does feel good to be connected to other people. You don't feel alone. As it's mentioned the beginning of the pod that it's easy to feel so alone. It really is. It feels so lonely. Especially if you're just watching TV or if you're on any kind of social media platform, you know. I think the engagement with others in real time is really important. And as someone who's empathetic, you weigh and measure. You have to make sure that you're not draining yourself and that you're not taking on too much responsibility and really weighing out like, what is it that I can and cannot control right now? Like there's so many maddening, infuriating things happening right now. And sometimes you do give yourself a break, like intentionally go, today I'm not going to look. Give yourself a break, weigh and measure, choose your media resources really wisely. I ask my friends, who do you trust? At which media outlets do you trust?
Also think it's important to remember that small acts of kindness are acts of resistance too. Whether it's donating to your local food pantry to support people in your community who are struggling, or being a good neighbor and shoveling a sidewalk after it snows so that others in your community can get around safely. Or like we've seen in Minneapolis, there are people out there handing out food to the protesters, or, that they're sheltering people who, are being targeted by ICE. Care and solidarity show up in so many different shapes and forms.
Minneapolis, Minnesota is giving us the best demonstration. They are the model of doing exactly what you're talking about. And every time you're creating community, you are working against this gaslighting bullshit that's being shoveled out. So it doesn't have to be going to a protest. I mean, I just happen to have access to this, and it's something that I can do. I do feel like I'm in solidarity with people when I'm at the protest, but there are more introverted things that you could do. I mean, I've also been writing to my elected reps, and I think you have to remember people hesitate because we're in a blue state, right? It doesn't matter. They're counting. It's a numbers game. They're counting who is for and who is against things, and you don't have to communicate yourself perfectly. You just have to be clear. I am against this. When does it come here? That's what I've been asking my elected reps. What are you doing to make sure I'm safe and that I can go out and practice my free speech and, peaceful protest without getting shot in the face? Um, so any action like that, political, is good, but also, Gretchen, as you were saying, volunteering at your food pantry is also helping your neighbor. Any community, um, there's a there's a phrase for this in psychology. It's like pro-social, or maybe it's a social psychology, pro-social behavior, like the opposite of these, empathy is evil narcissists. You're like, actually, if I help make sure my neighbor has something to eat, it's not evil. In fact, it's a good thing. If I help my 80-year-old neighbor shovel out her driveway, that's a good thing. you know. So,
And circling back to empaths in particular, as we were talking about, many are feeling deeply exhausted right now. Can you talk a bit more about why that is?
um, I think that's a really good question, and I think empathetic people get very exhausted by social situations because they are feeling everything, because they're very acutely aware of dynamics, facial expressions, posture. They this profile of person tends to be very highly attuned to bullshit. Their bullshit meters go off pretty quickly. So it's exhausting. And I think the best thing I can tell you is if you're tired, let yourself rest. I mean, it's really interesting to think that I'm imagining that most people who fit this profile feel a little guilt, like, I'm just gonna stay home and watch TV. I'm gonna go to bed at 9 o'clock tonight. Nope, this is not the time to feel guilty about that. If you need it, if you need rest, you're gonna feel so much better the next day. If you just say, yeah, I'm not hurting anyone, I'm gonna stay home. So I guess the silver lining I can pull is you have to be really attuned to your internal gut instincts, your emotional responses to things, and taking them seriously. And that's how you protect yourself, is going, this particular thing isn't working for me. You know, uh, there's a protest this weekend and I'm feeling a little weird about not going. And I'm like, you know what? I'm not going to go, you know, because I'm going to take a little time. I'm going to see some friends instead. I also want to say, my friend Don once said to me, don't give them what they haven't earned. So even going out and doing something where you're not thinking about this crap is an act of revolutionary act right now. Like, you don't get every minute of my day. I'm going to go watch a movie. I'm going to go play music. What is good for you is good for the people in your life. Much better arrested you who's, had enough to eat and isn't on low blood sugar, and has gotten fill in the blank for what you need. I think there are a lot of empaths are, because they're absorbing people's energies and feelings, that they tend to be more introverted because they need time to recharge. So give yourself time to recharge, and then when you go out in the world, you're just more present, more effective, um, you know, really able to respond to things more effectively. And look, the interesting thing, Gretchen, is there's neuroscience behind this. When you're freaked out, you're acting more out of like your more primal emergency centers of the brain. And when you are rested and calm, what I like to call the executive suite, it's the prefrontal cortex, so it's kind of the front area of the brain, that's online. And you can just function more effectively. You can engage with the world from that. But I think, again, when we're talking about this profile of person, you have to realize that your own self-care has to be the first thing, because otherwise you're just being drained by the outer world. You can't stay centered. You can't, and then especially if you're being gaslit and told that you're too sensitive, crazy, not seeing things the right way, because that that personality type tends to question themselves all the time. I think part of that is societal. It's like, I mean, if you identify Gretchen as an empath, or a gentle soul, you've probably been told several times how much you're too thoughtful, you think too much, and you're too sensitive and all that. I mean, I've decided that's all bullshit, but it's still prevalent. It's still common.
I'm glad that you mentioned the power of being well rested because, I think about people who gaslight or people, who are called narcissists or exhibit that sort of behavior often benefit when others are really worn down because it's easier to control them. It's easier to keep harmful patterns going when someone's exhausted and overwhelmed or doubting themselves. And when you prioritize rest and self care, you're not being selfish. It's actually taking you away for a minute so that you can come back being clear headed. You can recognize the unhealthy behavior for what it is, and then you can show up with strength and clarity to face all the challenges ahead.
It's a really good point. And the interesting thing, Gretchen, is it's this is a very intentional strategy, of overloading and overwhelming people and getting them to mistrust their own perceptions. There's an acronym for it, and this is, it's from the world of psychological research. It's DARVO, DARVO, deny, attack, reverse, victim, offender. Okay, so it's deny, I never did that. Attack, actually, you're the bad person. And reverse, victim, offender, and you really hurt me. And you're dealing with a narcissist when there's a pattern, you see a pattern, and it fits that criteria, it fits that template.
I think one of the most frustrating parts of dealing with repeated behavior like this is how easily it can wear people down. And over time, the exhaustion can turn into cynicism. And I think there is a real danger in that shift. Can you talk about why cynicism can be harmful and how people can protect themselves from becoming too cynical while also staying grounded in reality?
I mean, Gretchen, I think that's such an important question because, again, for this particular profile of person, if you become cynical, you're really losing yourself. You're allowing the terrible things in the world to just hijack who you are. And it's not a great way to go through life. Like, we're, I think, socially wired to trust each other first. And that is if you're not pathological, like you think that the person you're dealing with has the best intentions. There's just enough people out there that don't now, and they're really front and center. I like the word discernment, because it makes room for, there's a healthy cynicism there where, again, if you're starting to notice a pattern of behavior, but you can be like, yeah, that person's not so well intended. But you don't have to become a different person. You can still go out in the world as a person who is empathic, who is optimistic, who has a certain amount of faith in human decency, and protect yourself with discernment. Um, and it's a term I'm seeing thrown around a lot, actually. There's a narcissism expert, Dr. Ramani, but she's kind of my hero, but she always talks about practicing discernment with people, like get to know people slowly. And you don't have to become a cynical person who just is suspicious of everyone, but you just want to give yourself time to suss someone out and you know discern the difference between, oh, that person's having a bad day and they said something that's shitty because they were in a bad mood, or pathological repetitive patterns of behavior. Those are two different things, and kind of keeping with the philosophy that the majority of people are good and well intended, and then there's a certain percentage that are selfish to the point of pathological and cruel. It's, it's a hard thing to, it's kind of a heartbreaking thing to realize, honestly. I think there's a kind of, I don't know what the language would be for it, but there's a moment as an empath where you realize that, and it's so heartbreaking, you know. And then it's like, okay, well, that's what I have to live with. There are people that just can't be trusted on this planet. If you see consistent inconsistency in somebody, if their words don't match their actions, that's a red flag. So you watch for that. Like, and it can be as simple as someone who talks a good game but is rude to a waiter. I can remember many times being in a situation with somebody who talked a good game, and then I watched the way they treated the wait staff, and I would be like, oh, I'm really uncomfortable. They were so rude. you know? Um, so that's one little thing to just watch out for, and then on a kind of on a bigger level, like choosing your news sources. I once took a workshop on, kind of being discerning about your news and listen for adjectives. How is this particular person presenting this story? Are they over the top with their adjectives? Is there an us versus them vibe coming from this? Or are they reporting facts? This is what happened. It's hard, we all have bias or whatever, but I guess, like, long story short, it's like your critical thinking brain, again, prefrontal cortex, right? Executive suite. You want to keep that as healthy as possible. And so that you can practice discernment, you can go like, something's not sitting right about that. This other thing though, that jives with me, that resonates, and it makes sense, and it's consistent. Consistency is a big thing, I think. Inconsistency, um especially consistent inconsistency, is really a red flag. So
You've described empathy as a kind of superpower, and I'd love to hear you talk more about that. What is it about empathy that makes it so powerful, especially in moments like these?
people who are true empaths or true gentle souls are really good listeners, and they have a way of understanding emotions that, it's uncommon. A way of actually holding really difficult feelings without having to fix, the situation, without having the answers, like sitting with uncertainty. Honestly, Gretchen, I think most people really, really struggle with that. And it's not that empaths don't struggle, it's just that they don't try to change things they can't, and they can sit with other people who are struggling without telling them, oh, you shouldn't be feeling that. And they're really good listeners, and they're good at seeing people for who, kind of accepting people for who they are. And what's really interesting about that is, if you read about attachment theory and psychology, the children who grow up with parents who can do that, who listen and who see them, they go out into the world feeling safe because they feel safe within themselves. So somehow you empath, you may have had that in childhood. Most likely you didn't, but somehow you came out with into the world with this skill of being able to see and hear and sit with people and not try to fix them, but trust that they will figure things out. And it's really powerful when you can go, that's what I offer. It's a superpower.
And I think it's important to have boundaries so that your empathy isn't taken advantage of and you can protect yourself while you still show up as a caring and compassionate person.
Like it's knowing what to say no to, you know, because it doesn't work for you, not because someone else, doesn't want you to do it. It's, like, that doesn't feel like I want to, it's not going to work for me. And really feeling that out. So, yeah, the boundaries are really where that's your locus of control, right? You don't want to give that away.
Esther, thank you so much for coming back on the podcast. I truly appreciate your time, your insight, and the care that you bring to your work. And I think this conversation is really going to give our listeners a nice pause and to think about practical ways to show up in community while recognizing empathy as a real strength. I want to thank you again for joining me to talk about empathy and how to honor it, how to protect it from people who try to wear it down, and also to stay grounded in it without losing ourselves. As we discussed, one of the most powerful ways we can show up for our communities, especially in difficult times, is by caring for others while also protecting our own well-being. And that balance allows us to act from a place of clarity and strength rather than exhaustion and cynicism or, being easily manipulated. For listeners who want to learn more, you can find Esther and her work at gentlesoulsrevolution.com. And you can order her book, The Gentle Souls Revolution, on Amazon. I'm grateful we got to spend this time together, Esther, and I hope listeners walk away feeling affirmed in their empathy and not seeing it as a weakness, but as a superpower, and remembering that our communities are strongest when we show up for one another with care, intention, and resilience.
Well, thanks for having me, Gretchen. I enjoyed it, and I hope you're right. I hope your listeners can pull a lot from this conversation that we had.
Thank you again to Esther Friedman for joining me on the podcast. I hope that our conversation helped you and gave you pause on how to show up for your community with empathy. I will be back on Sunday, February 15th with a new episode of Notable New England, so I hope you will tune in then. Stay safe, everybody. Help out your neighbors in any way you can, and I will see you the next time. Be well, everyone.